Okay, so let's get started. Thank you everybody for coming today to this event. This event is brought to you by the Motivation SIG at IAPL. SIG stands for Special Interest Group. You can join it if you are a member of at IAPL, which stands for the International Association for the Psychology of Language Learning. The link is in the chat if you would like to join, if you are not already part of it. This event is also brought to you by Saudi TESL, which is an international association aiming to spread knowledge about teaching English worldwide. Today, my guest is Giacomo Folinazzo. Hello, Giacomo. You are on mute.
Good morning and good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
So Giacomo holds a PhD in Language and Literacies Education from OISE-University of Toronto. He has taught languages for 21 years in Canada, Italy, Japan, and lectured a variety of language, culture, communication, and second language learning and TESL courses at Brock University, York University, University of Toronto, Western University, Mohawk University, University of Viterbo in Italy, and Niagara College. His most recent research projects on language education and teacher training include Divari with the Ministry of Education in Italy and University of Toronto's SSHRC-funded projects on prolingualism and the action-oriented approach. Dr. Folinazzo maintains an active academic life with research, publications, training sessions, workshops, conference presentations in Europe, North America, and the Middle East. His research interests revolve around language teacher training, language education, the CEFR, linguistic mediation, and the action-oriented approach. In September 2024, Mr. Folinazzo will launch the Center for Research and Education in the Niagara Region, the first of its kind in Canada. So welcome here, Giacomo.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Hoorie. It's very exciting to be here today and to share some of the research that I have done recently, but also to hear your voices and to as a colleague share best practices. So you've heard about my academic life. I'd like to talk briefly about my personal life. I was born in Canada, and then when I was 3 years old, I moved to Italy, where I lived for 15 years. Then I returned to Canada and I completed all my studies. And then just last year, I moved back to Italy for 1 year with my family. And prior to that, I lived 1 year in Japan. And my entire life, I had to adapt my language. I had to adapt my culture. I had to adapt the way I communicated. If I wanted to have friends, if I wanted to be accepted, if I wanted to have a job, I had to adapt. I had to really change the way I communicated and partially the way actually I face the world. So English is not my first language. My first language is Italian. And it's been interesting for me to be in this field in an English-speaking country where I'm the only non-native speaker in my group of colleagues. And at the beginning, I saw that as a weakness, but then I realized that it was actually a strength because I can identify with the students and understand the process that and the difficulty in kind of becoming more English-like as a person and my way of communicating. Also, it's important to remember that when you move so many times, I moved 23 times in my life. Every time you absorb new culture, new language, you change, you evolve, and you kind of looking back, you're not who you were, and you're not who you will be. And so this kind of always this ever evolution is very important, and it has influenced my studies and my research. And this idea that languages are in constant development, and they're a very complex activity, and languages allow us to do things. So I'd like to we're going to talk today and share some of the ideas that I have researched and I have studied.
Okay, sounds interesting with all this experience and, you know, going from different countries and different cultures. So, you know, you are partly interested in the CEFR and going beyond its standardization. Can you tell us a bit about this?
Normally, when we hear the acronym CEFR, we think of the levels. We think of B1, we think of C1, we think of A2. And unfortunately, the document that was created by the Council of Europe is the standardization of levels is only a small part of their goal. The Council of Europe, their goal is to promote democracy and human rights. And there is no better way to promote democracy and human rights than through language education and through ideals such as all languages have equal status, all languages are important, plurilingualism is the norm in the history of humanity. Is actually not common to be monolingual. It's more common to be plurilingual in if we look at back in history. And so the document is also mistakenly seen as a top-down document. In reality, is a very bottom-up. So, for example, when we see the descriptors for the different levels, but also for the different modes of communication, which we will talk about shortly, for mediation, for example, or for production, for reception, these descriptors are the result of hearing the voices of about 1,300 language practitioners from around the world. And all this data was collected in a massive project in 2016. And all this data was collected, and then descriptors were created. But the descriptors are not meant to be only a standardization tool. That's only a very, very small part of what the purpose is. They're meant to be objectives that allow us to design language lessons, language curricula, language classes. And we will talk about this idea of the backward design, but also some of the philosophies in the concepts in the CFR are what are meant to inform our language learning and our language teaching. So one important change, for example, so there was a 2001 version and was very, very influential. And then about 20 years later, in 2020, the companion volume came out, which is, it's really part 2, but they've decided to call it companion volume. And in these 20 years, all of the work and all the research that was done in language education has influenced this document. One of the important changes that the document is promoting is really a paradigm shift, which is going from teaching language in skills, so the classic speaking, listening, reading, and writing, to teaching modes of communication. So modes of communication are, for example, reception, which include listening and reading, production, which include writing and speaking. And so far, this is easy to kind of understand and group. But then we also have interaction as a mode of communication, as the third mode of communication. Now, one may say, well, interaction is the same as speaking and listening. But when we think about it, it really isn't. Because speaking and listening have, of course, their distinct features. But if you think of an interaction, whether it's done in person, for example, two friends talking or speaking in a group, it requires very, very different skills. It requires pragmatic competence. It requires a linguistic competence. It requires cultural competence. And there is an element of unpredictability in a conversation. Because, for example, if two friends are talking about their weekend, or a group of friends are talking about an event, or studying together, or working together, the conversation takes an unpredictable turn, because one person may direct the conversation a certain way, another, etc. So the type of listening that we do, the type of speaking that we do, the type of competence that we need to have is very, very different than just speaking and listening. Also, in the 2020 volume, ironically, during the pandemic, so coincidentally, but very well timed, we have also descriptors for online interaction. So, of course, we are online right now, and this is a bit of a different setting because it's me talking, so there's not as much interaction as there will be later during question and answers. But if you think of a meeting or any kind of interaction where there's more back and forth, the way we interact online is very different than the way we interact in person. First of all, we have less body language to help us. We also, there's a need for redundancy. There's a need to kind of be clearer. There is a need to slow down. There's a need to use different modalities. So sharing a link, showing a picture, reading a text online, typing in the chat. So the way we communicate online is different than the way we communicate in person, and is different than just saying, listening, and speaking. But what's really, really interesting to me, and that's what I dedicated the last few years of my research, is on mediation. And mediation is the fourth mode of communication that includes all other communications. Examples of mediation would be, for example, Dr. Al-Hoorie tells me some information, and I go to our friend Saad and I relay that information. So why is it mediation? Because there's the initial having to understand Dr. Al-Hoorie, his understanding the intended message that he has for me. And then I may summarize, I may omit some information, I may simplify, or I may amplify some of the information he told me to then communicate it to Saad. Another example of mediation is listening to a lecture and taking notes. This is something that I've been teaching for many years, even before being aware of the term mediation. And it's one of the most useful skills that my students have developed, although they don't really enjoy it at first because it's very difficult. But when we think of what mediation is, we are listening. Let's say we watch a video lecture. So we listen to it, and we're trying to understand the language, we're trying to understand the message, we're trying to understand the structure, the tone, all of these linguistic and non-linguistic elements present in the audio. And then we are processing it, we're mapping it in our head, and then the next step is to write it down. And when we write it down, we're organizing it into different points, into details, into main ideas. And then we're kind of laying it out on paper, perhaps writing a summary. And we're writing this for our future self. Our future self means that in 2 weeks, I will have to take these notes and study them again for a test, for example. So this idea of processing information is really, really important. So we have mediating communication. So as I said, when I deliver a message from Dr. Al-Hoorie to Saad, that's mediation of conversation, of interaction. Then we have a mediation of concepts. And the mediation of concept is what I just mentioned with listening to something and taking notes. I could perhaps show a table here. It was also in the reading. Is it okay if I share my screen for a moment?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So just to give additional examples here. So when we look here, we have mediation activities to the left. And then we have mediation strategies. So the mediation activities are mediating a text. And you see, for example, note-taking. When the CFR talks about a text, they mean any type of information. So whether it's written or an audio form or media, any kind of media. Then we have mediation of concepts. So for example, working in a group, understanding a message, or making somebody else understand the message, and mediating communication. So facilitating plurilingual space, acting as an intermediary. But then we have mediation strategies. Two main strategies are to explain a new concept or to simplify a text. So explain a new concept, how do we do that? Well, we link to previous knowledge, we adapt our language, or we break down complicated information. And then we have strategies to simplify a text by amplifying. So amplifying meaning adding examples, explaining, and or streamlining a text, which is making it simpler to understand. So the reason why these are important is because this is what we do on a daily basis. One of the most important things that I emphasize when I run teacher training sessions is that every time we introduce something new, in this case, this is not new, it's just revisited and re-elaborated and operationalized in the CFR. Operationalized means that we take this concept and then we have specific descriptors, and these descriptors allow us to bring it to the classroom. So what is important to understand here is the fact that mediation is not something extra that we have to bring in. Language teachers and teachers in general are very, very busy with all kinds of demands, with student demands, with curriculum, with testing, with administrative demands, with professional development. So there is at times a resistance to embrace something new, and justly so. In this case, mediation is not something new, because I'm sure all of the examples I just showed you is something that you already do or your students already do in the classroom. So what it is, it's a matter of formalizing it, harnessing it, understanding it, raising awareness, and working with it. And so the CFR presents these descriptors for mediation in a very detailed way per level. There are fewer in the lower level, so they begin more intermediate, higher level, and it allows us to design lessons. And one of the things that I have done as part of my research, but also part of my teaching, is that I have designed mediation-based tasks. And mediation-based tasks are part of the action-oriented approach, which was part of the readings that we had shared for today, also known as AOA. And the action-oriented approach is mentioned in the CFR, not fully elaborated, but is mentioned as a methodology. But then it was developed by Dr. Picardo and Dr. North in a 2019 book. This book here. Oh, you can't see with my image, but I will share it. It's called The Action-Oriented Approach: A Dynamic Vision of Language Education. And so this is a very
Speaking of the action-oriented approach, you are an advocate of this approach. So most teachers are familiar with task-based language teaching.
Yes.
Are there any fundamental differences between task-based language teaching and the action-oriented approach?
Thank you for the question. So there are a few. Of course, it's a very long answer, but I will highlight some specific points. So task-based sees language as allowing us to reach a goal. And so it is based on the communicative approach, and we have, for example, role plays, or we have games, or we have a specific situation where, like, ordering a coffee at a coffee shop, or changing a ticket at the train station, etc. So we have kind of like simulated realities within the classroom that allow us to work within within the situation. So task-based language teaching has had a very significant, made a significant contribution to language teaching. The fundamental differences with task-based learning and action-oriented approach, see the action-oriented approach as the next step in the evolution of task-based learning. So, for example, in task-based teaching, usually the tasks are somewhat transactional and mechanical. In the action orientation, what we require is creativity. So the way one group or one student or one learner completes a task is very different from each other, because it requires the creation of new meaning. And by that I mean the use of creativity. I'll give you an example. So one of the most popular tasks that I use, it asks students to, so first of all, let's make a distinction between what's a scenario and what's a task. So a scenario, also known as learning scenario, is a situation, usually, like in task-based, it's usually imaginary. In action orientation is a real scenario. So one of the elements that is different between task-based and action orientation is that in action orientation, we are looking at a real situation. So in the classroom, I am Giacomo. I am not the taxi driver. I am not the waiter in the restaurant. I am myself as a 45-year-old person, etc., etc. So the scenario gives the context, and then the task is, and there are strong differences in terms of how we define a task, especially in task-based. There's some disagreement about the official definition of a task. But in the action-oriented approach, a task is basically the resolution of a problem or finding a solution by creating a final artifact. Let me give you an example which may make it more practical. One of the tasks that I work on with my students, it's very popular, is called living on a budget. And the scenario is as follows. Your roommate asks you to help him with budgeting. That's the first time that he has lived outside of his parents' home, and he's in Canada, in my case in Canada. And he is left with $800 to spend in 2 months. Now, $800, I think in Saudi Riyal is 2,400, if my math is correct. And so he asks for your help in creating a budget for the next 2 months. The budget will need to cover food, entertainment, and clothing. He is really upset because he doesn't know how to do that, and he's afraid it won't be enough. So he asks you to help you create a budget for him. So what the learners have to do is they have to, first of all, in groups, they have to brainstorm ideas. Then they have to go to authentic websites. In my case, they were websites from my town where the university is located. And they have to look at grocery stores, movie theaters, clubs, used clothing shops, restaurants, bowling alleys, movie theaters, etc., and find out all the prices, find out if there were student discounts, find out ways to save, etc. So they have to do basically research on authentic material, not imaginary, actual real websites. Gather all the information, share it with their classmates, create compromise in terms of what to include, what not to include in the plan, and then they would create an actual presentation, and then present it to class. And they do this all in about 2 hours. So when we look at this mediation-based task, that's an action-oriented task, it requires agency. And that is a fundamental difference between task-based and action orientation. Agency is the active seeking of information, the active deployment of resources, of repertoire, plurilingual repertoire, pluricultural repertoire, where they have to basically be the agents of their own learning. And by doing so, they're working within reality. So in one of the great things about this task is that at the end, they have learned, first of all, how to mediate with each other, how to mediate the text and the information that they find online, on their phones, on websites, on videos, on newspapers, etc. And then they have to mediate again when they create the final artifact, which is also another important tenet of the action orientation. They have to create a final artifact. In this case, it's a presentation. This was done, usually we do it online because we can have interesting kind of media. We use Jamboard, which is a free website that allows us to kind of almost like a whiteboard where you can create images, etc. And then the final part is to present this information in a very organized manner. So what happens here is that we accept that language is a complex matter. There's no linearity in language, as you're all language experts in this room. So you understand that learning a language is not going from language A to language B in a smooth way. There's a lot of complexity. There's language that emerges. So that's an emergentist view. That the language that you need emerges if the task that you're completing requires you to find the language that you need. So it comes as needed. And also there's this deployment of agency from the learner. So the learner has to, it's the learner's responsibility to seek this information, to find out how we say this, to find out the vocabulary, to find out the cultural norms, to find out any kind of plurilingual connections between differences between languages, etc. And what's also important is the co-creation of meaning. So you're creating this with your classmates to then present it at the end. And so all of these elements here are important because what happens is one important element of the action orientation is that to create it, we use a backward design. And the backward design works that we take a descriptor, and in my case, they were descriptors of mediation. So they were descriptors of mediating a text, mediating communication for B1 level. So this descriptor worked as the outcome. And then from there, I moved backwards to design a task and a scenario that would allow us to reach the outcome. So we start from the outcome, we move backwards, and from there we design the task and the scenario that would allow us to reach the outcome for that level. What's also really, really important is the reflection piece. At the end of a good action-oriented task, we would have some sort of a discussion where we asked, okay, what have you learned? How did you find that information? How did you reach it? Is it different than in your country? And things come up like food banks. Food banks don't exist in my country. I never heard of the word bank. I thought a bank was only a place where you deposit and withdraw money. I didn't know there was a food one, etc. So there are many elements of reflection that come there. And what's important is that part of the plurilingual view is that everybody's repertoire, but also everybody's journey in language learning is very different. So inviting the reflection makes us think that there is not one final correct answer. Fill in the blank, page 7. That's not how language works. Of course, there are things that are correct, there are things that are incorrect grammatically, but how we get there, the journey, is very individual, which is kind of part of the idea of agency. So what is interesting about the action-oriented approach is that we create these real-life scenarios using real-life material, and students are being themselves. The challenge is, of course, for a student who, this is often the case, we have students who come from countries where the education is very traditional. So the methodology is very traditional, very teacher-centered, 40 students in a classroom, listen, answer A, B, C, D as your answer, fill in the blanks, give me the part of speech, explain here, give me a short answer, what's right, what's wrong, very mechanical, very transactional, very unlanguage-like. So they study language like they study math or memorize the definition for their biology class because they have to pass an IELTS test. And that's the unfortunate reality of the damage of standardized testing, which most students around the world see language, especially English, as I have to pass the IELTS. Language learning and IELTS are synonymous. And that's very, very sad because we know that language is a much more complex system. And so what happens is initially there needs to be a little bit of a buy-in from the learner. And what I mean by buy-in is that they have to trust you and they have to trust the method. Because if they're used to having a teacher tell them what to do, how to do it, answer the question, there's a right and there's a wrong, listen, don't ask questions, don't expand, don't disagree because you don't disagree with the teacher. Now all of a sudden we're asking them to deploy their agency. We're asking them to complete this task in whichever way you like, but here are 3-4 simple steps. Use these websites or similar, create a map or similar, create some sort of a final artifact. I will guide you along the way, but then the teacher, instead of being the center of focus, becomes a facilitator. And that's when learning really happens. If we think of first language acquisition, which I know you have all studied, when we look at the remarkable ability of a child to learn a language, I have 3 children. I've seen my children learn to speak English and some Italian very well from 0 to 3. So they go from 0, literally 0 language, but 0 age, to 3 speaking really, really well. And of course, we can get into innatist theories here, but that's kind of beyond the point. But how does a child learn a language? The child learns a language based on need. They are talking to their parents or caregivers, and they need to say milk because they want food, or they express a desire to reach a toy, or they miss their mommy or their daddy, or they call their dog or their sibling, and then they fall on the floor and they say because they hurt themselves, and slowly their environment, their scenarios, right, but their environment is what gives them the affordances, the opportunities, and the chances to develop the language based on needs. If the child does not learn how to say milky or how to express their feelings, the child will not survive. So that is why, based on situation, based on real need, the child does not learn a language by sitting there and filling in blanks and learning the present perfect and then the past perfect after in a sequential kind of imaginary way. Eventually, the child learns to use it in a perfect way, as perfect as a 3-year-old can speak, by making mistakes, by kind of figuring out, by imitation, etc., but being immersed in the situation based on a real need. So there are some parallelisms with the action-oriented approach, where we are learning. Of course, adults and children learn languages differently, and of course I'm not going against that argument. I'm trying to draw similarities with the fact that as adults, we learn because there is a need, there is a goal that we need to reach. And also, it's also really, really important to teach our learners not just the language. I always say that I am not a language learner. I train my students to be good language learners. I'm not there to give them lists of vocabulary, to give them phonetic advice, to correct their spelling, to correct their grammar. Of course, I do all that. But what my goal, if I am successful as a language teacher, my goal is to make good language learners. Because I see them 1 or 2 hours a day. When they leave the classroom, that's when the learning should continue to happen. Self-monitoring, understanding that language allows us to do things. Language is not getting a 6.5 in an IELTS. It's not ABC. It's not filling in the blanks. It's not spelling the words correctly. It's not making a list of this is the word in English, this is the word in French, and making long, long lists that really don't serve any purpose. Language is something that we do. Language is something that we do together. And language is something that allows us to, yes, communicate, but also achieve goals and do things. And that's why the word action-oriented approach is because through language, we do things. We create budgets. We find information online. We relay information to a friend. We understand the concept. We type a text message and then answer to a friend who asked us what the message was about. All of these hundreds of different actions that we do throughout the day, they're multimodal. We never just write, we never just listen, we never just speak. There's always a combination of modalities of communication. So this is kind of the paradigm shift that the CEFR is advocating for. But it's not a top-down. These are the voices of language experience, language users and language learners. And that's what they've experienced. But then we can't just have theory. In a real world, we need practice. And that's what the descriptors are for. This is why the standardization of language levels, the famous P1, A2, etc., that's just standardization is necessary for practical reasons, of course. But really, what's behind the descriptors is an entire philosophy of how languages should be taught and should be learned.
So from the student's perspective, this is interesting for the teacher to implement, but the learner's motivation, how do you think using this approach is going to affect student motivation?
Great. That's a great question. I have 2 examples. Let's stay very, very practical. So I've always wanted to learn piano. So I sing professionally, and I've had a bit of a singing career, and I've always wanted to learn to play piano. And I wasn't disciplined enough in my teens. I was too busy in my 20s. In my 30s, I had a family, and I was raising a family. It's very difficult. So just this year, at age almost 45, I decided to take piano lessons, right? And all of my non-music friends would say, why are you taking lessons at your age? And I was like, don't worry about that question. So as part of my learning, I have to learn how to read music. I have to learn how to train my fingers so that I make sure that I'm hitting the right notes. So I have to train my eyes. I have to train my brain in understanding the concepts of music. And I have to train my fingers. So when I sit there, and I get tired very quickly because I'm sitting there, okay, that's a B, that's a C, and then something so simple, because I'm at the beginning, is very difficult. But what I did that was really motivating for me is I want to be able to accompany myself as I sing. So learning how to play chords. And as I do that, it really motivates me because I can play chords and I can sing along, and then when my friends come, I can show off a little bit, and when my children listen to me and they're also taking piano with me, I'm showing them that I can play a song. So it's really, really important to me that I have reached the goal that I could play. I learned my first Elvis song that I'm able to play, and it's very motivating. I played hundreds of times because I see the final result, something that is meaningful to me, and it's really what I wanted out of piano lessons. Of course, the theory is important. Of course, everything else is important. So when it comes to language learning, the motivation comes from the fact that we are showing the students, the learners, what we can do with language. So after they take our classes with the action-oriented approach, they are able to relay information, they are able to take notes, they are able to talk about something that they just listened to, they're able to deliver a message. So what they can do with language is the same as me playing my first song on piano that keeps me motivated. And that's what motivates the students, when there is something that is real life, meaning that it's not just filling the blanks, and I will never use that when I'm using language in real life. What I need in real life is to be able to communicate to my roommate or summarize something that I just listened to on TV, or being able to extract only the information that I need from a website, or be able to send a quick text message expressing my ideas. So the motivation for the students comes when they're able to do things. Just like I'm able to play a song, and of course I need theory, and of course I need to be able to read music, but being able to do something with language, achieving that level of mastery, that's what really motivates them. But also the real life situation. So not the fake, let's talk about why nuclear energy is not good for a country. If you're 18, I'm sorry, but I don't think that's one of your daily topics. But talking about how we can use AI or ChatGPT to write a message, or how we can, for example, find the best restaurant in town and save money, or how to plan a trip to London, because we may go there one day and at the same time we're learning about the trip, or how to analyze and talk about the lyrics of a song. That is what motivates our learners. I just want to show this quick chart here that addresses your point there. If we look here, we have at the top the action. So this is part of the research that I conducted recently. So when we have the action-oriented and mediation-based tasks, what these tasks within the scenarios, what they do is they require agency. They require the learners to be active in seeking information, finding solutions, very, very learner-centered. The teacher here is only a facilitator. So the deployment of agency, what happens is that it triggers self-monitoring. It triggers meaning creation, the facilitation of learning space. What does that mean? It means organizing your group, organizing your ideas, organizing how you're going to do it, time management, all of these things. By doing so, it influences confidence, because the more I do it, the more I kind of feel empowered, and it's very important. We go from being passive learners, recipients on which we pour knowledge in, which unfortunately is a traditional way of teaching, to the learner being a social agent, actively seeking knowledge. And by actively seeking knowledge, we deploy strategies. What strategies do you use when you find a new word, when you have to seek information, when you have to mediate text? What are your strategies? So all of these blue boxes here, they all influence each other in a kind of cyclical, chaotic, non-linear, but dynamic way. They all influence one another. And then what happens is that this symbol here is not greater than, it's a symbol for music that means a crescendo, so an increase. So what we have here is an increase in autonomy. And this increase in autonomy, and that's what we want. We want to create autonomous learners. We want to create learners that are able to be good language learners. That's what we mean by autonomy, that are not passive but active in their learning with all their strategies. And by doing so, it increases their agency. And all of this, there's a strong effect on motivation, because getting good at solving problems, getting good at creating new knowledge, things that are personally relevant, that matter to me as a learner, not a fill in the blank, but I'm going to talk about, for example, one of the many action-oriented, one one of the many action-oriented tasks was to create a recipe book. And a recipe book, this is also to promote plurilingualism and pluricultural pedagogy. So we ask our learners to bring to class a recipe that's important for their family. It could be a birthday recipe or just a special occasion, any kind of family tradition recipe. So they would bring it to, this is kind of more relevant to kind of younger learners. So they bring it to class and they have to explain the different steps. They have to kind of explain the recipe and then write it down. And there's all the language that goes behind writing it down and organizing it with a picture. And then this recipe book, the collected, all the learners' recipes are collected into a book. And then the book is printed and they each get a copy. The amount of pride, so this was part of one of the projects I did in Italy, the amount of pride that there was behind everybody having something so personal, which is the favorite recipe from the grandparents or great-great-great-parents that kind of got passed down to children, made it relevant. Say, wow, everybody has my recipe, and let me tell you how it is. It's very good. And of course, we can expand it and have them make the recipe and bring it home. But to summarize, the two key elements that were really motivating is the fact that there is pride in sharing something that's really important to them, something very relevant, something very personal. But there's also the pride in being able to complete a task. Not just I got a 90 in a test or 8 out of 10 answers correct. That's very artificial, excuse me. But being able to actually complete a task, being able to solve a goal in an original, creative way, because that's the one part about action orientation is that it requires creativity. The way I complete a task is very different than the way that my classmate completes the task, but we're following the same steps and then we're sharing it with pride. And there's also a little bit of competition between, groups that are what they've created and whatnot. And
so Mr. Giacomo, thank you very much for the very thought-provocative session. We will still have a bit more to go, but I would like now to invite Mr. Saad Shumrani to join us and share his thoughts on today's session. Mr. Saad Shumrani has about 20 years of teaching experience and in curriculum design. Can you hear me, Mr. Saad?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Okay, all right. Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Giacomo and Dr. Ali for this opportunity, and especially Dr. Giacomo for this really thought-provoking and informative session. I've really learned so much. And I think we are really talking about a real paradigm shift here that is going to be, I think, a breakthrough and will bring about a lot of positive changes to the language education classroom. Just reflecting on Dr. Giacomo's presentation, I totally agree with everything he said, and I always tell my students that most language learning happens outside the classroom. Inside the classroom, we facilitate the learning process. We try to support students here and there, accommodate the individual differences, but the real language education happens outside the classroom. Now, with this approach, I think we're going to be able to bring what happens outside the classroom to the classroom. And I think this is also a very timely approach because with the, technological changes that are happening and with the technology we have these days, I think this is going to support this approach a great deal. And just one example of this is the other day I was talking to students about online shopping. And I was really like impressed by how much they know about that and how much I don't know about it. So the learning process here actually, I think, you know, I was supposed to tell them, but I was really learning from them. So as educators with the, like, you know, all the information available to students now, we need to discipline ourselves to be ready also to learn from them. And, you know, we were talking also about, you know, reading the comments and reviews, and they were telling me everything about online shopping. But, you know, again, when we talk about something, one of the topics, like nuclear power, we talked about that. And, you know, when we start talking about that, students are like, yeah. Okay, what do you want me to write? The advantages or disadvantages of that? And it's really, really like, you know, superficial. But when you bring something like online shopping, we were talking also about fashion and new trends in, you know, in clothing and stuff. And they were telling me things about their, you know, personal lives. And yeah, this is a new trend, but, you know, I'm not really into that. Look at my friend Ahmed, look at his haircut. He's into the new trend. And that really provoked discussion. And also, relating also to your question, Dr. Ali, about motivation, it was really motivating. The classroom was really engaging. The students were really engaged. So with this approach, the action-oriented, I think we are really going to be able to motivate students, you know, speed up the learning process, make them relate to what, you know, what happens inside the classroom. These are just my, you know, a few thoughts, and this is really a paradigm shift. And even just, you know, to add one point, you know, we were talking about even soft skills and the importance of that. We're talking about, you know, jobs and what you do at work and things. And they were also really into that, how you communicate this idea that you need to be professional here, you need to be careful with that. You really kind of win your students when you use an approach like that. And thank you very much, Dr. Ali, Giacomo, for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saad, for joining. Yes, Giacomo, do you have any thoughts?
So thank you very much, Saad, and very interesting that we reconnect after so many years. It was a very pleasant surprise. We met in Canada almost 20 or 15-ish years ago. The highlight of my day actually was seeing you here. And I thank you for, I think you've definitely captured the idea behind the action-oriented approach. It is a paradigm shift, because one of the key things that you said was the idea of shifting the power from the teacher to the learner, and the true essence of it being learner-centered. You know, what you said about online learning, online shopping. And this is what we do now with language. So on a daily basis, we don't write 5-paragraph essays. We write text messages, we reply to posts on social media, we send quick emails, we might write a note for a friend, but that's what we do. This is the reality of what we actually do with language. And so when we empower our students to say, okay, what is it that you do with language that you can do very well in your L1? Okay, we want to be able to do that in L2. And there needs to be a comfort level from the teacher to kind of let go of the power and allow the students to find their own paths, of course, with guidance. But as teachers, we have a curriculum, we have a test on Wednesday, I have to get to page 7, we tend to be controlling, because that's kind of how most courses are designed. There's a schedule to follow. When in reality, language learning happens in an emergent manner, and sometimes in an uncontrolled manner, just like it does for a child. So this idea of, okay, let's talk about something that's relevant to you, online shopping. Well, let's design a scenario where you have a specific budget and you have to purchase a few things. Where would you go? Why did you choose these pairs of shoes versus the other one? I read the reviews. What did the reviews say? Did they look like real reviews or not? All in language. Of course, we're not neglecting grammar. We're not neglecting skills. We are focusing on what is the real goal of language. And, in this case would be online shopping, which is what we really do with language. So why are we training learners to fill in the blanks when in life you'll never fill in the blank again? And that was a very nice comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giacomo. There are some questions in the chat, so I'm going to read one of them. One question is, how do real-world tasks differ from the action-oriented approach? Because real-world tasks inherently invite active actions to complete the task.
So the real world, so there is obviously a parallelism there. So a real world task requires students to go out there in the real world, and that's at the foundation of the action-oriented approach. So in the action-oriented approach, we bring the real world in the classroom. So the classroom becomes part of the real world, not an imitation of the real world, but part of the real world. So what the action-oriented approach suggests was to have the goal of the task or the dictated by the scenario is based on an outcome that is suggested to be used with the Common European Framework. So one of the descriptors. So that's a step number one, is the outcome, the specific outcome that we want. Then we design the scenario and the task backwards based on that outcome. As part of how the task is completed, we have 3 or 4 steps, generic steps, but we need to kind of give guidance on how to complete it. There's a creation or co-creation of a final artifact. And in doing so, there's deployment of strategies. So the action-oriented approach formalizes in a way, or operation, I shouldn't say formalizes, but operationalizes how we can do this in a classroom with specific steps, because of course it has a pedagogical goal in mind. But the two are tied.
Yeah, okay. There is another question in the chat related to the challenges in the action-oriented approach. It demands a lot from the teacher. A teacher should have a very good command of the curriculum, assessment, language placement, etc. How do you feel about this?
Yes, that's a great question. So I would actually kindly disagree with the effort from the teacher. Is actually less is required, in the sense that there is more in terms of the designing of the task. So the task has to be designed appropriately with the backward design. But in reality, in the classroom, the teacher becomes a facilitator, and the student is the one who is actively doing the work, basically. The student is the one seeking information, preparing it, mediating, et cetera, et cetera. So there needs to, one way that I suggest to, because of course when we present a new methodology, there's always that fear of, well, I have to change everything that I'm doing, et cetera, et cetera. What I would suggest is, if you are looking to give it a go, to try the methodology, is not to completely change what you're doing, but to add a task with a scenario at the end of a unit. So for example, if we go back to the budget unit, we had one unit about becoming an adult. That was one of the themes of our book and of our curriculum. And it talked about how to live by yourself, how to transition from living with your parents to living by yourself in a new country, which is what most of our students do. And so, of course, I still continue with our common methodology, the 4 skills and the textbook centered, etc. But then at the end, usually on Friday, at the end of the week, I added as a capstone, I added an action-oriented task. And that's when it basically, the design is very minimal, because really what you have to look at is pick a goal from your descriptors, create a scenario. Scenario can be very simple, and there are many, many examples out there. And then have the 4 steps. And then basically you set the conditions, and then we have the students, okay, go. I guide you, but go on your own. So I would say that perhaps at the beginning, there's some effort in kind of understanding the methodology, but in reality, the majority of the effort, as it should be, is on the student. The teacher is a facilitator guiding the student. The students are the ones doing the work and learning.
Okay. There is one more question, an interesting question about resources. Are there any websites or resources where teachers can find examples or lessons using this approach?
Yes. So because it's a fairly new methodology, so the textbook on the action oriented approach was published in 2019, and the descriptors for the companion volume were 2020. It's only a few years old. So there is not yet a plethora of material, but there is some. I'll be able to share some of the material that I've created, some of the websites that are used. I'm also working on a textbook myself that should be ready mid-year next year, the first textbook ever on the action-oriented approach. I will share with Dr. Al-Hoorie. I'll share some of the material that you can use as a basis. I would say that the best thing is to look at the material in terms of how it's designed, but really for the action orientation to work, it has to be adapted to your reality. It has to be adapted to your setting. So I have, for example, even my budget task that I've created works in my context because it's an English for academic preparation. It's a specific age group, et cetera, et cetera. But what I would suggest is the material that you see is adapted. So look at it as a template and adapt it to your specific goals. I have, because I run many workshops on the topic, so I have templates that you could follow. I have actually one here that I can share in digital format. So I'll be sure that you have material to share and read. I was planning to do that anyway, so that you can create your own material, look at what's out there, and create your own.
I can add the link to these materials in the description box on YouTube.
Beautiful.
Yeah, there is one question about, can you give some strategies about how to integrate the different modes of communication? I think, in your research, you sometimes refer to a task called Lost in a New Town. Maybe you could tell us more about this task and explain how the modes of communication may be integrated.
So I would say one of the easiest step to do it is to familiarize ourselves with the descriptors, because the descriptors tell us exactly, for example, at B1 level, what reception looks like, and what production looks like, and what mediation looks like, etc. And as a language teacher, you will very right away understand what these descriptors are, what these objectives are, and design activities. And that's how the activities will stimulate the use of the modes of communication. So the Lost in a Town is a very popular one. Is part of a research project that we worked on in Toronto, and so it basically there are different variations. One of the variations that works really well is you say you have a friend who is coming to your town, and he or she is looking to learn about your town, historic sites, museums, points of interest, shopping, etc., etc. So what the group is required to do is to create either a brochure or a video or some sort of a guide or a presentation where they introduce all that the town has to offer. Now, it can work. There are many variations. One would be, let's say, if you were coming to Niagara Falls, as you see in the background here, if you were coming to Niagara Falls, where a college is, and I would show you where you can go in the journey behind the falls. You can take a helicopter ride, et cetera, et cetera. Another way to do it is to actually, and this is what I prefer to do, is to have our learners choose a city around the world. An English-speaking city, if you like, but of course works with any language. Okay, we pick Sydney, we pick London, New York, Los Angeles, Singapore, any kind of city that you like. And then they have to learn about the city, learn all the top 10 places, the best restaurant, the kind of free activities, the parks, all about the city, and then present it. So what's interesting about that is that they would be looking at authentic material. First thing they'll do is they'll go to YouTube, then they'll go to the tourism website, and then they'll go to maybe Expedia to find the website. And that's, if I were to go on vacation, that's where I would look. And that's where they would look, learn about it, learn the actual language, learn the material, the authentic material, and present it. And that's what we mean by, this is what we mean by authentic, real world relevant, because the information that I'm learning and the language that comes with it is real. It's not a photocopy on a book that talks about London 10 years ago. It talks about London right now on the London website. The restaurant right now that I could pick up the phone and make a reservation for at this very moment.
Okay, there is another interesting question in the chat. As no language learning session is probably complete without talking about AI. What's the role of AI, do you think?
So that's a great question and a very relevant one. So I'll hold my thoughts on AI, because otherwise we go, and I know you've had great sessions already on that. But one way to do this is to, for example, allow students to use AI to create something. So we have one group that would completely use AI for the creation of let's continue with the Lost in a Town. And they have to create a brochure of the top five things to see in Riyadh, or 5 top things to see in Dubai, etc. So then we could have 3 groups. One would fully use AI, and then they would share their prompts. The next one would be, and by AI, of course, we mean ChatGPT. That's usually what we mean. And the second group would not use AI at all. And then the third group could use it, for example, as AI assisted, so that for ideas, etc. And then when the brochures are created anonymously, then there could be a session about analyzing the language and seeing which one do we think was created by AI, where are some of the elements. Does it sound too robotic, too rigid? Do you feel there's a human element, etc.? So there are creative ways to include AI, and I would say that a good way to answer the question is, how do we normally use AI right now? And AI is very new for all of us, right? It's only been in the last maybe year that it's the buzzword everywhere. But not being an expert in AI, I would say that if you think of how you and me and everybody uses AI on a daily basis, bring that in the classroom. So let's say that you write an email to a professor asking to change a grade because you think the grade is unfair. So let's write that email. Actually, write me an email as your professor. Write me an email saying that you think the 72% grade is unfair. Then you write it, and then we take it, cut and paste it, and put it into ChatGPT and say, please make the language very formal and very kind of apologetic. And then, ChatGPT spits out the text. And then we sit there and look at these elements and talk about it. that's one idea of how it would be done.
Okay, there is a question about plurilingualism.
Yes.
We used this word in this session, and how is plurilingualism different from multilingualism?
Great question there. So plurilingualism is also at the foundation of the Common European Framework. And in very simple terms, the idea is that we are all plurilingual. Even those of us that speak only one language, it's never one language, because within the same language, there are varieties. It could be a dialect, but also in a different community. For example, the way you speak to your doctor, to your neighbor, to your cat, to your coworker is very different even within the language. When we extend this to different languages, plurilingualism says that according to plurilingualism views, all of our language are part of the same network. So we basically have one unique language repertoire, which this means also partial knowledge of a language. So for example, I learned Japanese, now it's almost all gone, but there is some residual knowledge. So I can't say that of course I can't say that I can work in Japanese, but I can't say that I don't know any Japanese, because what I've studied is there. And as you know, language is what allows us to make sense of the world, is what allows us to shape our thought. So when we're learning different languages, we are changing the way that we're viewing the world. And that's all part of our big one repertoire. When it comes to multilingualism, the view is different. The view is that there are languages, but they're all side by side. So if I refer to us as being multilingual, I mean that we speak English, that we speak Arabic, that we speak Farsi, that we speak French with no connection. They're just 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. In plurilingual views, all of those languages are part of one unique repertoire. And this repertoire is constantly on. So even when I'm speaking English, my Italian thinking is on, and my Spanish thinking is on. So all languages are interconnected into one repertoire. That's the fundamental difference. And with plurilingualism, there's a strong pedagogical implication, which means that our existing language allow us and help us to learn a new language, to increase the competence in the other language. So it's never off, they're always on.
Okay, I think we have a question here. Ahmed, did you want to ask something?
Yeah, so thank you. Actually, part of the question, Dr. Hoorie, you already asked about the challenges that the emergent methods pose to teachers. Because the understanding is that everything depends upon the teacher's discretion or decision which part of the language is to be developed, and where and how to identify the weaknesses while doing a task. And this is true about all the emergent methodologies, be it dogme, the TBL, or the AOL is very new to me, so I'm just adding that to that list. And it seems that is the case there as well. The problem is that the emergent methodologies cannot be the sole thing to teach a language course. The problem being that because they're more of supplementary in nature, you can use them, let's say, once in a week or in a fortnight to review stuff. Because the problem is the frameworks. I mean, I've used dogme. Is like, you cannot in a sense leave it to the students' emergent language only, and in contrast, the more the methods, the textbooks, that the content available there makes it easy for teachers in a longer language course. So that is a concern I expect. I'm afraid this would also pose. So my question is, are there any particular frameworks which you suggest teachers should use with AOL?
Ahmed, thank you very much. You do raise very important points regarding emergentist-based pedagogy. The idea is that we're not abandoning grammar, we're not abandoning vocabulary building. It's just done in an emergent way. So I'll give you an example of one course that I taught in a university here in Canada. And it was called Canadian Culture, but it was really meant to be a very advanced ESL course. And so all the students in this course were first-year university students of various fields, chemistry, business, sociology, all very, very different disciplines. And in the course, what we did is we reviewed. Each week there was a topic, and the topic was based on an academic article. And so it was to really, the objectives were to improve their academic English abilities. So what we did was we read the articles, and then they did presentations on Canadian culture. It was different things like homelessness and the economy, things like that. So they had to read it, they had to present it to a group, and they had to write essays. The real goal was to improve their language, not really learning the content. Now, what happened was that the students in this course were advanced ESL learners, yet they were still making quite a few grammar mistakes and pronunciation mistakes. So to address your question, which is not something everybody's really comfortable with, is that error correction and specific linguistic elements, such as grammar and pronunciation and vocabulary, would be addressed ad hoc. So when for example, a student is presenting, I take notes, and then we stop the class and say, okay, let's review, the voiceless sounds, or this grammar feature here. Let's address it as it comes. And I find that the result there addressed in an emergent way based on needs that appeared was very, very fruitful, because teaching grammar in a linear manner, I disagree with that method, because that's not how we really learn. As adults, of course, we like structure. As teachers, we need to follow a curriculum. But that is why we're suggesting with this method a paradigm shift, because we're not abandoning those elements. We're addressing them as needed. Is it a challenge? Yes, it's a challenge if we're used to a traditional method where we have to have a test on Wednesday. So of course, a teacher alone cannot really, fight the full battle. There is a requirement for example, assessments. What do the assessments look like? So if we are dropping an action-oriented approach in a curriculum that is strictly skills-based, test-based, that does not follow the outcomes, for example, of in line with the CEFR, then yes, it would be a challenge. So if the design of the course, the curriculum, the assessments, the final assessment could be a task. The completion is nothing new. A task used as a final assessment. Then the job of the teacher becomes easier, because there are all these kind of forces working towards the same direction. The difficulty is the paradigm shift, and I have experienced this myself. I've been teaching for 20 years, and now looking at AOA methodology really is challenging, like I said, because I'm teaching it in a program that's still integrated skills, listening and speaking, reading and writing, and it's been the same thing for the last 20 years. So not to deny the challenges of emergentist ways. Of course, it requires specific training on the teacher. There's still quite a bit of research that's being done in terms of assessments, in terms of as you said, supportive. I think it's the word that you used, versus making it kind of an entire course. these are all questions that are valid ones. They're being addressed by research. From what I've seen, it is very, very positive, because it is time that we stop looking at language as, being structured by Unit 1 and Unit 2, and seeing it more as allowing students to have a specific outcome, which is reaching a goal and being able to do things with language versus getting a 7 out of 10 in a test. Those are great questions, Ahmed. Thank you. I would love to continue talking about them, because it is, of course, a longer conversation. So let's please stay in touch.
Thank you very much, Giacomo, for this interesting and thought-provocative session about the action-oriented approach. It has been very informative. Many people are commenting on the chat. I hope that people have found it useful and they can have some takeaways to their teaching. Any final thoughts before we close?
I just wanted to, if I may, and we'll take Adrian's question. I am very, very happy to continue the conversation. Of course, our time together is limited, and if it's something that interests you, or even continue a conversation of disagreement, to continue the academic discussion, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be sharing some resources that might address some of the questions that I wasn't able to get to in this session. But I invite you to keep in touch. If there's there are research opportunities that I have, there's training opportunities, quite a few things that I'm very, very happy to work with you on. So I encourage communication.
We seem to have one more question from Adrian.
Adrian had it up, yeah.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yes. Hello there.
Yes, okay. Sorry, I wasn't sure if it should turn my video on or not. My daughter said my hair looks terrible, so I should not turn my
I think it looks great.
Video on. Oh, thank you. Do we have time?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Jacob, thank you very much for your very informative talk. I enjoyed it a lot. I do a lot of work with Dictogloss as part of the task-based language teaching. I have a couple of textbooks, and I have some new textbooks coming out soon. So please buy 1,000 copies each. One of the issues that I find with using task-based language teaching, and similarly like the action-based teaching that you talked about today, is that the students, especially in Japan, aren't so willing to take calculated risks when they're not so willing to make some grammatical mistakes, or they're worried about whether they're going to say it in the right way or not. Do you have any particular techniques that you use in your own classrooms to encourage students to be willing to take these calculated risks, to make some mistakes in their learning?
Adrian, thank you very much for that question. I have taught in Japan, and I have many Japanese students, so I understand in a deep way the kind of the cultural concerns with the Japanese, of the fear of making a mistake, they want it to be perfect at every word. It is not an easy feat. It's also the result of the Japanese education that trains them to kind of stay in line and don't make mistakes. And so I recognize the challenge for sure. I would say that are you currently in Japan, or are you in your students, are you in an EFL context or ESL?
I've been teaching Japan for 27 years, so
your students are in Japan and you're in Japan, yeah. So
yes.
that makes it even more challenging. I would say it doesn't come overnight. I would include a small element of kind of let's call it a free or agentive language production in every class, so that they kind of slowly get used to it. There is one thing I find that enhances their anxiety of making mistakes is when they're doing it in front of classmates. afraid of, the classmates picking out the mistake, and so there's kind of like that peer shame, that type of thing. One suggestion would be to have a one-on-one session with the students, maybe scheduled, where they would work on something that's really relevant to themselves. So tell us about something that you really, really like. Pick an English song, look at the lyrics, tell me what you think the feeling of the song is. Free speaking. We're not looking necessarily at number one is I really would need to know your opinion. Feel free to make mistakes. Let's not focus on grammar, etc., etc. I find that has helped when we remove kind of the peer pressure out of the context, but also reminding them that the message is more important than the actual language. That's one of the things that has worked. I would also have them I find that timed writing helps. For example, we watch a video, we have 4 minutes to write. Forget about mistakes. Write as much as you can in 4 minutes. Anonymous, don't write your name down. So I think it's removing part of the identity, in the sense that if you're submitting something anonymous, you may feel better about making mistakes. If we remove the peer pressure, we may feel better about doing it. If we how was the task? Have you tried anything that was task based? Was it also that you still found the reluctance in the mistake making?
Absolutely. I mean, today we did a task of the students were in a situation where they went to Singapore Zoo. So talking about going online. So they had to go online to the Singapore Zoo website, and they did a role play, again, very much under time pressure. So they had very little time to prepare. They're encouraged not to write their memos down in English, but write them in Japanese and just refer to them, but speaking in English. So I just want to see if there are any tips that you had that would be effective for encourage students to get over that particular anxiety of aiming for perfection, I guess.
I would say your contest is particularly challenging because I'm assuming that all of your students are Japanese.
That's correct.
Right, so very, very homogeneous in Japan, and you're the only non-Japanese, or I mean, you are now Japanese, but non-Japanese in the classroom. So it highlights the challenges. I would try the one-on-one. Really, I don't know if I have a very strong answer for you, to be honest, because I recognize the challenge there. The times where there's a good relationship with the teacher, where there's kind of the affective filters are lowered and they're in a more relaxed atmosphere, and expressing something that is important to them, and familiar to them, where they don't have to seek particular vocabulary. Not talking about nuclear power, they're just talking about a song that they liked. I find that could be the beginning of making a difference, but it's really done in small steps. So if you're teaching a full year course, if there's even a small difference from the beginning to the end, I think that's realistically the most we can expect to do, because you have so much working against you, really, culturally, that it's not a one man's challenge.
Great, thank you. I mean, I have many questions, but we don't have time today.
Please keep in touch. I would love to continue these. These are very, very fruitful. So please let's stay in touch and create a one-on-one. There's so much we can continue working on.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gambate.
So, thank you again, Giacomo, for your time. Thank you, Saad, for joining in. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to everybody who has listened, commented, and asked questions. It has been an exciting session, but unfortunately, we have to stop at one point. But we will have future sessions. So let's be in touch. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day.
Best of luck. Please stay in touch. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you.